welcome to another episode of The Influential Nonprofit. I'm your host, Marianne. As you know, I work with nonprofit leaders to grow their influence so they can ask for and receive what they want, need, and deserve. And I am here with Megan Donahue, and I am excited because we have not talked about annual reports at all. And I've done like 90 plus episodes of this podcast. So I'm very excited to meet you, Megan, and talk to you about annual reports today.
Yeah, well, I'm really excited to be here, Marianne. Annual reports, it's funny. I think like there are a lot of nonprofits in the same boat. They're like, we've done all kinds of communication projects and donor stewardship activities, and we haven't quite gotten to the annual report yet. There's a lot of intimidation around that,
Yep.
especially for smaller shops. And I mean, in all honesty, it's not for most of us a requirement that we put one out, right?
Yes.
So it's easy to push
It's
it on
easy to
down.
It's easy to just push it away. Okay.
Mhm.
So before we get into that, let me just tell everyone you're a writer and content consultant who helps nonprofits and the people who serve them tell their stories and build connections with their communities. And you have a monthly webcast about nonprofits and tech called Love and Robots, which I love that name, by the way, and a donor communications nerd. Yay. All right. Now, I always start in this podcast with the first question, which is tell me something you're proud of that you don't get to brag about a lot.
Oh, that's a great question, especially for this section on annual reports, which are like bragging is a part of that.
Right.
Let's see. Things I am not able to brag about. I can pick out piano melodies by ear, which
Wow.
has never been terribly useful because I can't do two hands. So I don't really brag about it, but I'm inordinately proud.
So you can pick up piano melodies oh, you can play them?
I can pick things out on the piano by ear, figuring out the tunes and playing them
Wow.
through. This was not the best skill ever because it, as a child, made me think I didn't need piano lessons, which was not true.
But could you just is that like a good party trick if somebody has a piano?
Yeah, a little
Okay.
figure it
So it's
out.
not complete. I mean, I think that is a pretty cool skill, whether it feels useful or not. All right. So let's talk about annual reports because, like you just said, it is like a lot of, hey, we're amazing or whatever. And
Mhm.
do you feel like people are in a little bit of resistance? I mean, I think we can say, oh, it's time, it's money, but I always look for the deeper thing going on. Like,
Mhm.
it feels braggy or it
Mhm.
feels boastful when we've been taught, that doesn't feel good.
Right. Yeah, I think there's that barrier. I think there's a barrier of, like we all say in the sector that we want to be transparent,
Yes.
right? But that's also risky when you actually put it out there. And an annual report is an opportunity to invite your supporters to know more about you. And I think there's
Correct.
a vulnerability there that kind of makes it easy to just be like, well, maybe we'll just send an email and call it good.
Right. Is it sometimes hard to maybe they feel deceptive? Like, I want to tell the truth, but the truth is not a really positive thing, or I'm afraid to tell what really happened.
Absolutely. I think there's an opportunity here with annual reports to actually build relationships with your donors, with your supporters that comes from that transparency and authenticity. And so that means we have to look at like, what if this wasn't a good year? We've got
Right.
options, right? And the first impulse that I think is a very human one is we want to spin it. We want to find a way of like, well, it wasn't disappointing actually. It was fine. Or we won't talk about that thing that didn't happen because
Right.
maybe everyone will just forget. But then when we do that, and I understand that impulse, right? We all want to protect ourselves. We have the reputation of the organization to consider. There's a lot of things that make us think that's a pretty good option. But the opportunity for actual authenticity and building real relationships with your donors comes from inviting them into community with you and saying like, "Hey, this is what's actually going on." And it doesn't have to be in a way that's like, "This was a disaster and I wouldn't give us money." But saying things like, "We're really disappointed that this is how it worked out. This is why this
Right.
happened. These are the steps we're taking to try to change things. But right now, we're very bummed that we didn't get to launch this program the way we thought we were going to because of
Right.
these factors. And that isn't, I think we have this like self-protective thing of like the organization must be perfect at all times or our donors are all going to get mad and leave. When really, most of the time, I mean, you might have a couple people who do, but I think for most donors, seeing, especially at a time when trust in nonprofits is generally low across the American populace, I think putting your mistakes out there or the things that were disappointing and inviting your supporters into that story shows them that you're not trying to trick them.
Right.
And I
Right.
think you can't buy that kind of authenticity and relationship building.
Yes.
You just have to be brave. The cost of it is bravery.
Right. And that's so good because that's really like what I work with people on is showing up, being authentic, transparent, vulnerable, because that takes right courage and
Mhm.
bravery. And also the more authentic, transparent, and vulnerable you are, the more powerful you are. So somewhere along the way, we got the message that we have to be perfect, right? Like we have to
Mhm.
be beyond reproach to be just held like as to be a peer to anyone else. And
Mhm.
instead of like I always look at it like human relationships, right? If I'm the kind of friend that's always spinning stuff to you or hiding stuff
Mhm.
or right, then you're like, this isn't I don't want to be friends with somebody like that because there's no trust.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. And also I don't know if you've ever heard of this. It's like the failure report. Like
Mm.
there's different organizations like, hey, here's all the ways that we screwed up this year and here's what we
I
learned
love
from it.
that.
I know, I love it too. Like embracing that as
Mhm.
because somewhere we got the I think that we're not allowed to fail, that we're not allowed to try things and fail. So I love that approach. And also, let's talk about like format. I
Mhm.
think an annual report can be, it feels like, oh, it has to be, lots of, a document, a printed, booklet
Right.
with lots
The
of
big glossy.
pages, right? Very, very glossy. Or it has to be some sort of like equally well designed online document. So what do you work with people on as far as format goes?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of good formats and I available. But I think knowing your audience should inform what you're doing. So if you start from a place of who am I sending this to? What reasonably can I expect that person to read, first of all? Because as much as, like those of us who have a soft spot for the big glossy booklet may be sad to admit, like most people are not going to spend hours poring over your beautiful annual report, right? They're going to look at
Right.
it, they're going to glance through it, and then they're done. So thinking about who you're sending it to, what they might need. If you have a very engaged digital audience, that might be a good clue that a digital report is a better idea for you. If you have a population that, like, if your major gift officers want leave behinds, or you have donors who are like, I love this, this is my favorite thing, then maybe you do want to do a printed report or some variant between. You can also do things of like, we're going to make this many copies of our printed report, and the rest of it is a PDF on our website that we send an email inviting people to check out.
Right.
So you don't have to send a printed copy to every single person on your list. I would generally suggest that people don't because that's expensive.
Yeah. So when you talk about format, let's just talk about, is it
Mhm.
always have to be many pages? Can it be, I mean, simple? Like
I
what?
think simple is good.
Mhm.
I think if you have the stories to tell, and this is a general thing for donor communications, and because everyone always wants to know, like, what's the perfect length? How many words in the email? How many pages in the report? How many,
Mm.
all of that. And the answer is, like a really frustrating one because it's, well, how much do you have to say actually?
Mhm.
And how much do they need to hear? So if you have a lot of things you need to communicate to your audience, not just that you kind of feel like you want to, but like these are things they need to know, that's going to be longer. But if
Sure.
you have, like, we have 3 big stories this year and we can tell them to you in 3 pages, then do that. I don't think there's a need for filler or stretching to make it weighty. I think if you have like an infographic on a postcard that communicates the big highlights of the year, that can function as an annual report for the majority of your audience.
Right. And so what elements do you recommend that go in an annual report?
I think you have to do something with your financials. That is part of the deal.
Mhm.
That doesn't have to be very in depth. I think an overview of this is how much money we had, here are the sources it came from, this is about what we spent, presented especially in a visual way, your pie charts, your bar graphs, that kind of stuff, just
Right.
to give people an overview of your financials, is good. You definitely don't need to like include a line item budget. That is more information than most of your supporters want. Um, so something there, something that tells the story of that money, what it means. Not just because sometimes we focus too much on totals and are like, this is our percentage of individual donations versus our percentage of foundation donations. And I don't think your average donor really cares. They want to know what that money made happen.
Right. Yeah, outcomes.
So,
Mhm.
yeah, getting right into that. So, something about your budget, and then getting into the human stories of what happened this year. The successes, the failures, whatever it is, I'm very passionate that we tie it to people and stories because that's what people engage with. And that's even perhaps more importantly, what they'll remember.
Mhm.
After they read an annual report, it would be if we gave everyone a quiz, which we wouldn't do, but if we did, I don't think that your average supporter would be able to say, their service numbers are, they served 100,006 people at their food pantry. They have this many pounds of food. They have these many things. Like, those are fine details to include, but the thing that's gonna stick is, this is a story about someone who uses the food pantry.
Right.
I remember that. I remember Tanya and her kids going to the food pantry for the first time, and that's gonna stick in a way that your numbers aren't for most folks. So I
Mhm.
think getting right into that, presenting your programs and your accomplishments through what your supporters helped make happen, someone experiencing change, and really tying that to people doing things in the world so that it sticks and has an emotional impact.
Okay. And so when you work with clients, like do you do the planning, the writing? Like how do you work with clients?
I'm available for all those things. Um, yes, but the writing is my big thing. The
Okay.
planning, I definitely encourage folks to be thinking about the annual report year round because you know how it goes. I mean, we've all been there of where suddenly it's annual report time and you're thinking, oh, right. I need quotes and stories, and I need to talk to the program people about what's going on. You can do that, not at annual report time. You can build yourself a little repository of stories you can use for fundraising,
Right.
and then you're ready. That's the preferable way. But that said, a lot of us get into that point where, things pile up and we find ourselves hunting for stories.
I think also, if you are telling stories regularly, you can always pick a story you've already told.
Absolutely.
Like it doesn't have to be new. People, I mean, like what we forget is like we like reruns. We like
Yeah,
that episode of Friends or whatever. We know the story and it's reassuring and like so I feel like it's okay. Like if you've been telling that story, oh, what are our favorite three story or that really illustrate what we wanna say, you probably already have them and been telling them. It's just a matter of earmarking them. Oh, this would be great. This might be great content for annual report. Yeah.
absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah, and the other thing in addition to I agree with you that, like, we love reruns. The other thing is that when you're inside the nonprofit communications, we know we told this story on social media and in a newsletter article and all of that, but we are the only people who are keeping a constant inventory of the
Right.
stories we tell.
Right.
Nobody else is, like, sitting there reading their newsletter, living their normal life, being like, "Ah, yes, in April of 2022, they told this story as well."
Well,
Like, no
oh,
one's paying that much
oh,
attention to us.
yes, pearl clutch. Ah,
Oh,
how
no.
dare they? Right. Like, and especially with social media, the reach is so wacky. Like, who knows who heard that story? And it's totally okay. I do feel like we put too much emphasis on, oh, it always has to be new, new, new.
Mhm.
People really like to stories, or it could be like a story you told, and then the annual report has some kind of update
Right,
or an
that's great.
extension. That story. Um, and so in the planning of it, like
Mhm.
let's just say I am a like I'm just thinking of a couple of clients of mine or whatever who
Mhm.
are, running nonprofits, and they maybe have not done an annual report before.
Mhm.
So what is the best way you would feel like if you've never done it before to get started?
Yes. I think thinking about your audience first and foremost, because the report is for them. Figuring out who those people are and how you're going to use the report to communicate with them. So if this is, I'm sending this to everybody in my donor file, that means I'm not going to pitch it as simply a major gift cultivation tool, right? I'm going to provide a broad range of interest. Um, then I'm going to think about at the end of this report, how do I want them to feel? You can ask later, what do I want them to know? But I think the first question is, how do I want them to feel? Do I want them to be inspired? Do I want them to be excited? Do I want them to be determined to join me in this fight? What is the emotional result I'm hoping for? Obviously, people can have whatever emotional response to your content that they want to, but we're in an ideal world. What am I trying to elicit?
Right.
And from there, then start thinking about your highlights. What are the big things this year that I can tell them about? And how do I tell them in a way that gets us to that emotional effect? So this sounds manipulative and it's not about just making people feel things, but it's the difference, right? Because we could say this year we worked with 200 middle schoolers in our after school arts program, serving 4 middle schools that are underserved in our district. Or we could say, painting is how I show people how I feel,
Right.
says Nadia, age 12. Nadia doesn't like talking in class, but in our arts program, she starts expressing herself through paint and she's starting to dip into multimedia. Um, Nadia has started talking more in class, say her teachers, now that this is happening. Nadia is one of 200 students. She's at Carter Middle School. Carter Middle School hasn't had an arts program since 1995, but with our programs, now students can experience these
Wait,
benefits.
did you just make that up? Because
Yes.
that wow.
Right?
That is but you so but you did that so beautifully, taking that from, a person, like how you would want to, like, we serve this many people, right?
Hmm.
And then so it's always like start with the individual, take it to the bigger picture, and then end back with that person, right?
Right.
And that's a very typical basic like journalistic
Yes.
style, right?
Hmm.
And I love how you did that. And I, because I am all about the feelings, okay? Like
Hmm.
that is my jam. And I like when I coach and train people, I'm basically like a performance coach, right? And
Hmm.
it's all about like, okay, how not what I have learned over my years is like we're always like we want the perfect talking point, we want the perfect
Hmm.
paragraph. Really, it's about even in person or in print or however, how do I want to make people feel?
Right.
Right. And it's the energy. I say this all the time, the energy by which we create. This is a thing that my coach and taught me. The energy by which we create like guides and determines the creation.
Hmm.
So right. And so like if like so creating these annual report, anything you create, being really mindful of the energy that you are
Hmm.
creating with, and then because it's really an emotional connection,
Absolutely. And
and
we
they're
know
gonna
that that's where we make philanthropic decisions
yes,
is with that emotional or in that emotional space. It's not an analytical space, even
it
though it
is
feels
not
like it should be. And we try to reason people into giving, or we try to like persuade them into giving with like our authority and our worthiness and all of this. And it's like, that's not where they're making the decision.
right.
It's
It,
about emotion, it's about identifying with a cause or with a story or as a person who cares about these things. So if our communications are focused on that, like, we are good, we'll prove it. Here are our numbers, here is our stuff. Are you convinced? Please make a gift. We're missing out.
yeah, I am 100% on board for that. We somehow believe like we are not rational decision makers.
Mhm.
In any aspect. Like we're going to make a decision and then we find the facts and the data to
Right.
back up that choice. We want to believe that we're rational decision makers because it makes us
Mhm.
feel better, but really it's not.
Mhm.
And that's okay, right? That's just how the brain works. You can't fight biology. Okay. And so it's important to really be conscious of, because they say, heart, mind, wallet, right? So it's like,
Mhm.
but like be conscious of, how do I want people to feel? Like what is that feeling? And then, and I love what you're saying is really that everything, that every piece of content, whatever, is that supporting that emotional connection,
Mhm.
right? How is the story going to support that, of whatever inspiration, right? Determination,
Mhm.
whatever it is. I think that is a perfect way for somebody to get started. Um, and I also feel like what you said was really good about, it doesn't have, you could tell 3 stories. It doesn't have to be, a whole huge production, which I think
Right.
that's what people think they need to have.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think the thing you can do is always better than some best practice ideal. I mean, it would be great if, you know, every organization had all of the resources and all of the time and all of the staff to devote hours and hours and hours to their annual report and turn it into a glorious donor experience. That would be great. But if you don't have that, don't let that ideal stop you
Right.
from doing something.
Right. Yeah.
The thing you do is 100% better than a thing you think about and never communicate with your donors.
Yes. I mean, and there's a thing like, just imperfect action, just doing it, just
Mhm.
trying it, just starting it. And
Yeah.
let it be what it's going to be, and love it for what it is. You know what I'm saying? And so like,
Mhm.
oh, it's not this, but it's great. It's perfect. It's everything's already perfect. That's what I tell people all the time.
Right. Well, and it feels high stakes, but in some ways, and in the ways of like, you should be transparent and accurate with your donors, it is. But in general, like, they're not waiting for you to fail.
Right.
They're not receiving your report and thinking, huh, well, this isn't as good as it could be. This is something else. They're just like, oh, I heard from XYZ
Oh,
organization. They did
great.
some stuff. Cool.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. Yeah. Much more. Yes. I love that. They're not waiting for you to fail. They're not sitting there ready to pick it apart. I mean, there's
Yeah.
always
I
going
think
to be
sometimes we
one
get this
person.
like pretend antagonistic relationship with donors where we think like they hate us and are like, ha ha ha, now you've done it.
Right. And really that's our own monkey mind. That's our own
Yes.
self-talk, stirring that up. And for like, because I talk about this all the time, but for people to know, like, anytime you're doing something new, um, or something that's a stretch, a little bit outside your
Mhm.
comfort zone, that mind is going to turn up, because it's the monkey mind is designed to protect you and keep you safe. So
Right.
it's like, oh, nobody's gonna like this, blah blah. And that's just a natural part of everything. It has really nothing to do with anything. And also it can stop us from
Mhm.
doing that because it feels really scary. Like, I don't want to do that, or maybe next year, you know?
Mhm.
Okay. So another thing is, how do you, I mean, is this something that you can do in-house, that you can, I know you help with the content, but what do you recommend people, like the how of creating this?
Yes. I think I'll talk against my own interests here and say if you're going to spend money and you don't have the opportunity to work with two consultants, go with a graphic designer.
Okay.
Um, to help you put it together. If you're doing anything other than like, hey, if you decide to do like we're sending a letter that is our annual report, then you don't need it. But I think images are so important for telling stories, that having a layout of your information in a way that makes sense with images that support your points and again lead people to that emotional result is important. I think starting with thinking throughout the year, as we talked about potential stories, so that when the time comes, you know where you're going, and just starting to draft those out and see how it goes. I think shorter is better for content most of the time, for these things. So if you can tell multiple stories that are quick and maybe one big one, that's a good strategy of having one big story about like the biggest highlight and then a couple of, I mean, it could even just be pull quotes that you put in sidebars of
Right.
from recipients or pictures from a project or things like that so that you don't have to. I think sometimes people think they need to write like an encyclopedia of their organization, and really
Yeah.
you can keep it fairly small.
What about like video annual reports? Do people do that? Like, I know nothing.
Yeah.
I'm just asking.
Yeah, people do that. And I think that's cool. I saw at one point, I want to say it was an Instagram annual report where they did like a certain number, I think it was a zoo that did a certain number of photos over a period of days with facts about their year.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but people do videos, and that's the same thing of focusing on human stories. And that's video is great because then you can let people tell their own stories in a really authentic way.
Yeah.
So there are all kinds of options.
Yeah. I would be jazzed to explore a video story. I think that would be really fun to tell it in that way.
Yeah.
Um and also again, it's based on your audience and like some of the assets that you have. If you have something
Mhm.
really visual like a
Right.
zoo, that may work for you, right? If the thing
Yes.
you're doing is not that visual, maybe that's not your best format. But to really
Right.
think about like, your audience and then the assets that you have, like how do those work best together?
Mhm.
Like when I was at 501 Creative, and we, and I'm sure they still do, we would like we might theme the annual report. Okay, so
Mhm.
and same thing with the emotional connection, which is maybe a day in the life or something like that. We had the annual report was a way to sort of break, I don't want to say break the branding, but just maybe do it a little bit outside of the normal branding and make it look a little bit special and different.
Mhm.
In order, I don't think that's necessary. Like, I think that's a nice thing, but that's not a necessary thing,
Yeah, I agree.
right? Like the emotional connection is the thing. So we were, writers and designers, so we could do that, right? But that's
Mhm.
like, just I would just say, like, if you can, it's just not necessary. It really is about how do I want people to feel when they
Mhm.
interact with this.
Yes. I mean, you can be as creative as you want. Like the sky's really the limit. But also, if you end up sending a letter that does the job, you've done the
Right.
job.
You've done the job. Yeah, you've done the job. Okay, I love this. And I hope this inspires people to either, do an annual report, or maybe they, stop for a couple of years and just explore
Mhm.
fun ways of doing it. I want to talk a little bit about your Love and Robots,
Oh, sure.
nonprofits in tech. So, what is that about?
Yeah, Love and Robots is about the intersection of nonprofits and tech. So it's a pretty broad area of conversation. We're launching at the end of this month. It's on the last Friday of the month at 2 p.m. Eastern. And it's a space to talk about how nonprofits interact with the world of technology and vice versa. So this month, Mina Das is joining me to talk about
Who is joining you?
Mina Das of
Okay.
Namaste Data.
Okay.
She's joining me to talk about ChatGPT for nonprofits.
Oh, that sounds juicy.
Yeah, I'm excited. So we'll dig into like how should we be using this? Should we be using this? What are the dangers? What are the benefits? How do we even get started? So that I'm excited about that conversation. But we cover topics as like what are the trends in nonprofits, how to choose software, ethical implications of technology, how the technology industry interacts with nonprofits via philanthropy and other things. So it's a casual conversation once a month on all things nonprofit and tech. So we have the human love and the technology
That's
robots.
technology, and that's beautiful. What a little yin and yang you're making. And then, okay, so if this podcast, I just want to make sure, because
Mhm,
I record a couple weeks in advance. So if
mhm.
people can't, because I want this, I want to learn about Chat GBT and nonprofits, or some issues that you've done. Can they access these episodes somewhere?
Yes,
Okay,
recordings will be available as well
okay,
on my website.
on your website. Okay, all right. And we have all that in the show notes. So if
Mhm.
you can get this, you can grab her website on the show notes. Anything else that you want to share about annual reports or nonprofits and tech, or anything in your expertise?
Yeah, I think the big thing with annual reports is it's easy to focus on how much work they are. It's easy to get intimidated, but the opportunity is huge. To connect with your supporters just as a donor touch point. It's fantastic to have a time where you're saying, this is the impact you made. And I'm not really asking you for anything. I mean, you may include a soft ask in your report. That's a whole other topic. But the opportunity for really connecting, sharing stories, bringing your supporters into your community in a meaningful way, this is huge value. And so I really just encourage everyone to give it a go, to try to get some of those benefits. Even
Yeah.
if it is, like a small endeavor the first time, even if you make a report and think like, it's fine, I guess, you're a step closer to those benefits. So I encourage everyone to not let the fear monkey brain talk you out of it by only focusing on what's challenging about it, and
Yeah.
instead look a little bit further ahead to the potential you have for building relationships with your donors.
That's perfect. I love that because the benefits far outweigh, the work to put it together.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And from my perspective, I would encourage people to like I just had someone who, he would do the annual report and he was also raising like $10 million in this endowment campaign. I'm like, why are you doing this annual report? You're like, why? And so just think strategically about the time and money to do this. Like, cause I
Mhm.
don't do this, right? I'm saying this for you. And Megan, like we want you to do well. It's not about like hiring people to do things, right?
Right.
It's about using your time and money wisely. And you don't always have to do it yourself, nor is it the most fiscally responsible thing to do it yourself, right? So if you're
Often.
sweating all night on this thing and hating it, when somebody could do it really quickly for you.
Right.
Because we tend to value money and not time. That's my point, right?
Yep.
So we value money.
Absolutely.
We want, I can't spend the money, but I'll do the time. But time has a value too. And
Absolutely.
just think strategically about how you want to get this done. And don't be afraid to pull in help to get it done. Because again, the benefits far outweigh the investment to have that beautiful, like annual connection with people. My friend Amy Fazio says people come for the cause, they stay for the community.
Mhm.
And like I really feel like this annual report is like really a way of like creating, really in creating and building that's strengthening the community.
I
All right.
agree.
Awesome. Okay, last question as always. So you're Chicago, I'm St. Louis, we're not that far away. So
That's
if I
right.
come, I'm gonna come to Chicago and we're gonna go to karaoke. So what is your go-to karaoke song?
Oh. Oh, oh, oh. I don't really have a go-to. I do not do that much karaoke, but, I will
Oh.
say "You're So Vain,"
Oh, Carly Simon.
Carly Simons.
Okay, that's awesome one. I love that. I don't think anyone's ever said you're so vain. That's perfect. I love it. I love it. One day in my dream, I'm gonna have everybody that was on my podcast. And we're just gonna have karaoke night, and everyone's gonna sing the song they
That'd
told
be so
me that would be their go-to song. But I love it. But or maybe you could just play the piano while
fun. Just pick out my little tunes.
while we sing. Well, Megan, thank you so much. And if people want to get a hold of you, how they're interested in learning more about what you do, how would they do that?
Yes. Thanks, Marianne. The best way to get a hold of me is via my website, which is www.donahuewritingchicago.com, or sending me an email at megan@donahuewritingchicago.com.
Okay.
You can also find me on LinkedIn. I think we've got that in the show notes. I encourage
Hmm.
people to connect. Whether
Yeah.
you're
Okay.
ready for a project or not, let's touch base and say hello.
Yeah, of course. It's always good to make the connection. It's nice to have those resources available to you when you decide you need them, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, Megan, thanks so much for being here and for sharing all about annual reports. And, it's kind of a good time because when we're recording this, it's March. People will probably be listening in April. But, and it's a good that you just get started. Like, just decide
Mhm.
today you're going to do it. Like, whenever your fiscal year is, just decide, hey,
Yeah.
let's do this and just commit to doing it and start thinking about, like, if your fiscal year ends at the calendar year, this is a perfect year, this perfect time to kind of decide, hey, let's
Mhm.
do this and let's just see what happens. You
Yeah.
know?
Spring is a great time to try new things.
It
All that
is.
new energy.
Exactly. It's like it's the season of like, growth and opportunity and newness. And, because I talk a lot about this, about, working in flow, and in winter is, it's about planning and kind of like, not
Mhm,
shutting down, but calming down, doing
mhm.
the planning, the energetic reset, and then spring is like blossom, woohoo. And so yeah, it's the perfect time of year to start thinking about, hey, what's new and fresh that we want to jump on. All right, thank you for
Yeah.
the inspiration today. And that's it for me on this episode of the Influential Nonprofit. If you are interested in connecting with me as well, I have a link in the show notes. That's a 15-minute quickie intro call. If you want to talk about, working with your board or you or your team to increase your performance in fundraising or anything else, I'm happy to chat with you. And that is it for this episode of the Influential Nonprofit.